Well, good morning, everybody. Back at it. Episode 10, Malcolm X. Episode 9, we learned that in the aftermath of the shooting, there were three arrests made. One of Thomas Hagen, otherwise known as Talmadge Hayer by his Muslim name, because he was caught on the scene, got shot in the leg by one of Malcolm X's bodyguards. So the crowd jumped on him. There was no question he was involved. Of course, he was a Nation of Islam member, so that means the Nation of Islam was at least involved. And then days later, two subsequent arrests of local ne'er-do-wells, folks that were NYPD was familiar with, criminal records both, also both Nation of Islam members. Wood and Johnson, known by their Muslim names as Islam. Let's see, Johnson was Islam and Wood was Muhammad, I think. Anyway, Wood and Johnson. And what we found out as time went by is that those arrests were fraudulent. The trial itself was fraudulent. Exculpatory evidence was withheld. They both had alibis. They weren't even there that day, according to their alibi, but also according to Malcolm X's own security, which was looking for any Nation of Islam members. And of course, they knew them, would not have even let them in the door if they had arrived. There was no physical evidence tying them to the crime. And the main assailant, Hagen slash Hayer, both said that neither one of them had been involved. But none of that mattered. They got convicted and sentenced. And it wasn't until 55 years later, 2020, that the state of New York exonerated them, threw out their convictions, and actually agreed to pay them a combined settlement with the city and the state of $36 million between the two of them. But there was a heavy price. I told you about the heavy price with their families and how the estrangement between the fathers and the kids and everybody, the extended family, etc., just couldn't be overcome. And Johnson ends up dying before any reconciliation. Wood, I believe, is still alive, but last I saw, there's still been no reconciliation. He keeps up with his family via Facebook from afar, basically. So that begs the question, if all the witnesses said that there were three gunmen and three arrests were made, but two of them turned out to be fraudulent, who are the other two? Then, if you add in Talmadge Hayer's statement, which was that he actually had four accomplices, where are the other two? Is there an investigation? Was there ever an investigation looking for the other four? Because of course, we know that there wasn't. But I want to tell a story today of Raymond Wood, because this goes to the security stripping, and this goes to the planning in advance of this assassination, up into and including the levels of all the FBI. And this is a story that didn't emerge until 2021. So you see what's happening is from 65 to 2000, well, from 65 to 77, it appeared that they caught the right three guys. Then in 77, Talmadge Hayer finally admitted the names of his four accomplices, which didn't include the two that were languishing in prison at the time. That was our first little bit of sunlight, a little glimmer of hope that uh, or that justice could, be achieved in this case. Although nobody seemed to make any moves. It didn't seem to change anything. And it was private researchers and attorneys that pushed this, pushed this, pushed this. Finally, in 2021 or 20, the state of New York exonerates the two, Wood and Johnson, and pays them this big settlement. And then in 2021, we get this story about Raymond Wood. And boy, that really change things. Let's go through this Raymond Wood story because all of a sudden now, instead of this being a Nation of Islam conspiracy with possible cooperation from the NYPD Blue, now the Raymond Wood story takes it to a whole nother level. I'm just quickly scanning through my source material, and if you choose to, if you want to look at it more closely, I've talked about them in all the previous episodes, so I'm just scanning through it without talking, without commentary. So if you want to slow it down and look at the sources, feel free. All right, so let's talk about this Raymond Wood. Now, I don't have a picture of Raymond Wood himself. I have a picture of his brother Reggie because he's the one. This story came out after Raymond died, and it's his deathbed confession. And he's a former undercover NYPD officer. So this story gets brought forth to the public by his brother Reggie, pictured here top left. Um, anyway, this guy was a former undercover NYPD officer, and on his deathbed, he admits to being part of a conspiracy that targeted Malcolm X. All right, so knowing what we know now to this point, you'd think, well, okay, that must be a conspiracy among Nation of Islam members and members of the NYPD. We already know the NYPD was supposed to have 20 to 24 officers. At Audubon that day, they didn't. We already know, according to an eyewitness, that an NYPD officer helped the second shooter escape. So clearly, they're involved in some capacity, right? Uh, the confession by Raymond Wood uh, gave specifics. He says that he was involved in an entrapment operation to entrap two members of Malcolm's security team in another crime, a separate crime, unrelated, which was a plot to blow up the Statue of Liberty just days before the assassination. And this would be the pretext, and it turned out to be just that, under which they could make an arrest of these two security uh, officers, these two bodyguards, prior to the Audubon Ballroom on February 21st, so that his security team would be compromised. That's exactly what happened. So two of Malcolm X's most trusted bodyguards were entrapped into this. It was just as you're going to see, it's just a conversation. They got invited to this meeting. Somebody talked about blowing up the Statue of Liberty. They left. They laughed about it, thought it was a joke, and never followed through. Next thing you know, they're getting arrested. Prior to this meeting, the Audubon Ballroom on February 21st, so they could hold them during this meeting so that his security would be stripped. So we've already learned the security was stripped via an infiltrator, a NYPD slash BOSSI operator, Gene Roberts. We've already learned that the security was stripped by NYPD not sending 20 to 22 officers that were supposed to be there to guard Malcolm X. And now we're finding that the security was stripped additionally by removing his two most trusted bodyguards through a trumped up entrapment scheme. By the way, this bottom picture here, Undercover Agent is Hero, is an article about Raymond Wood, so-called saving the Statue of Liberty, and how he, in uncovering that plot, uh, prevented it from, the terrorist attack from taking place. And so, but the whole thing was just a scheme. It was just a plot. Additionally, Raymond Wood revealed that he was inside the Audubon Ballroom at the time of Malcolm's assassination. So here is another undercover officer. He's not in uniform in the Audubon Ballroom on that day. So we already know Gene Roberts was there. We have a picture of him and his confession. And so now we have a second, Raymond Wood. And we now know because of Raymond Wood's revelations that two of Malcolm X's most trusted bodyguards were not there. They were sitting in a jail cell. under some trumped up charges. Raymond Wood also, in his revelations on his deathbed, said that one of the men arrested, Thomas Johnson, was innocent and was arrested to, quote, protect my cover and the secrets of the FBI and NYPD. So he was a patsy, just like we suspected. Thomas Johnson is pictured bottom there in the middle in the tan suit. So he's just blowing the whole case. You know, we already know what happened to Thomas Johnson was wrong because in 2020, the state exonerated him. This is just corroboration of that. And it tells the story of why he was arrested. This wasn't a case of mistaken arrest or, you know, this was an intentional, according to Raymond Wood, to hide his identity so that he wouldn't be exposed as an NYPD infiltrator. They've done the same thing with Gene Roberts, if you remember, in the investigation afterwards. The FBI and the NYPD never would reveal to the district attorney the fact that one of their own was inside and it could tell you who the three men were, the three shooters were, because you're staring right at them. They were in the front row, and he's standing in front of the stage looking at the front row. He knew their faces, but they didn't. They were so intent on protecting his identity so that they could use him again in the future that they did. So here is another case where uh, the presence of NYPD slash bossy infiltrators is hidden from an investigation from the public. And knowingly, these two men get arrested. And the FBI who's involved with bossy knows full well that they were not involved, but went along with it so as to protect their assets. According to Raymond Wood, both he and Gene Roberts, the two we've been discussing, were part of the Bureau of Special Services and Investigations, or BOSSI, which was a secret political intelligence unit of the NYPD nicknamed the Red Squad. I briefly mentioned the Red Squad earlier in an earlier episode. It was a movie was made about this bossy unit that was in all the major cities. And it was the FBI's attempt to root out communist infiltrations into government, into, whatever segment of society they were investigating. It was all about rooting out communists. So this was the purpose of bossy going after Malcolm X. And we've talked about how Malcolm X was leaning socialist. So not a big surprise that bossy would be surveilling him and now involved in setting him up for an assassination. Bossy was targeting Black organizations in particular, such as the Black Panthers. We already talked about how Gene Roberts will be used later to infiltrate the Black Panthers. CORE, the OAAU, which is Malcolm X, Nation of Islam, and of course, famously, Martin Luther King, whom J. Edgar Hoover considered to be a full-fledged communist. Bossy was an arm of the FBI, and it was involved in his COINTEL program, the counterintelligence or dirty tricks. And in this case, is trying to get rid of a potential problem, somebody he thought might become a Black Messiah through these dirty tricks. So when you say bossy, you're saying FBI. Bossy is COINTELPRO, and COINTELPRO is FBI. And both of these guys are bossy. So you might as well just say they're both FBI. Malcolm X was not unaware. He was very aware of bossy. In fact, several times in speeches, he would point at him. He said, quote, "We see that they have surrounded us with many of their own agents in uniform and, here's the important part, out of uniform, who have spent much time in here in Harlem posing as peace officers and at the same time breaking up the peace of Black people. So they're provocateurs." He didn't use the word, but that's what they are. According to Jerry Fulcher, FBI agent, Malcolm, and he was in on the surveillance. That was his assignments. He would know anything Malcolm said. He said, Malcolm oftentimes told his followers, quote, I hope you don't mind, but you're probably being tapped. We know that the cops do that to us. Just trying to establish the fact that Malcolm X was fully aware. And this was not something that the two sides weren't aware was going on. Uh, Malcolm X also said, if you have fear of coming under FBI surveillance, then you shouldn't get involved with me. After his house was bombed a week earlier, before he was assassinated, um, we've talked about how he initially thought this was done by the Nation of Islam. But then when the police set and fire said that they found that whiskey bottle full of gasoline on his bedroom dresser, you start to think, maybe the police are involved in this. And if the police are involved, that's BOSSI. BOSSI's the FBI. Anyway, he said, quote, the police know the criminal operation of the Black Muslim movement because they have thoroughly infiltrated it. So this goes to his knowledge of what's going on and how the Nation of Islam could be used or manipulated to make it look like they committed a crime, when in actuality, it's these infiltrators, these bossy provocateurs that are just behind the scenes pushing buttons. Um, so in 2021, in the deathbed confession, one of the most famous excerpts from this deathbed confession is the following, where Raymond Wood states, quote, under the direction of my, by the way, this picture here on the right is a picture of his confession, is a signature at the bottom. It's dated 2000, January 25, 2011, and was released in 2021. So he says, quote, under the direction of my handlers, I was told to encourage leaders and members of civil rights groups to commit felonious acts. It was my assignment to draw the two men into a felonious federal crime. This is these two bodyguards, so that they could be arrested by the FBI and kept away from managing Malcolm X's Audubon ballroom door security on February 21st, 1965. Sound familiar? This is security stripping 101. It reminds me of, in JFK's case, the driver died the month before the trip to Dallas, was replaced by a driver who would hit the brakes and, play along until JFK was killed. It reminds me of the guy in the passenger seat who was supposed to jump over the seat, cover up the president, never moved. He also was a replacement. It reminds me of that Secret Service agent, Robertson, who found out about the plot to kill the president. And on the day, he was in the Dallas field office, and on the day of the assassination, as the motorcade was proceeding, he ran down to the uh, intersection there, ran out and accosted according to witnesses, the motorcade, uh, yelling about what he knew. He was immediately thrown to the ground, arrested, hauled away, and he disappeared. He's never been seen since. His family continued to receive his paycheck in the mail, but they've never, he had a bunch of kids, wife. No one's ever seen him since. He just disappeared off the face of the earth. Yeah. It reminds me that, so there's three cases of security stripping where agents that could not be uh, corrupted were removed and replaced by agents that could be corrupted. And if you remember, the night before the assassination in Dallas, a bunch of those agents were down and drinking all night, partying at several different Dallas night spots. They some of them lost their handguns while they were down to their service weapons. Some of them lost their badges, left them lying around. Anyway, they reported to work the next morning, drunk, hungover, out all night. Uh, security stripping. How about uh, MLK? Remember, he had his trusted five men from the Memphis Detectives Bureau that were watching his back in Memphis that trip. They all got hauled in before uh, Martin Luther King left, to go to dinner that night. When they were finally all in Memphis headquarters, uh, all MLK was finally led out onto that balcony by another infiltrator. But the five that were supposed to protect him had to be removed. And so they were on a pretext. They were told to come down to Memphis headquarters. One of them was arrested when he refused to go. Security stripping. How about RFK? Now, he didn't have any security. They just infiltrated his security with Dane Eugene Caesar. He's the guy leading him by the arm into the pantry. That's about as stripped away security as you can get when you have the assassin leading the target by the arm. Over and over, here we see it again with Malcolm X, security stripping. This is in the words of the perp, right? 2 years after the Raymond Wood story, Mustafa Hassan, here is shown in photographs in the New York Times being present in the Audubon ballroom on the day that Malcolm X was assassinated. And he was grabbing one of the assailants as he tried to escape. This is a picture of him bottom left in the white hat. Top, same white hat, pointing at the picture. So what's the story with Mustafa Hassan? According to his testimony, quote, there was no presence of uniformed New York police officers. We've already learned that there were supposed to be 20 to 24 people there, officers there. Only two, and they were stationed in a Rose Ballroom, which is as far away from the Audubon Ballroom as you could get without being out of the building. So he's right. He's corroborating that. There was no presence of uniformed NYPD officers. And they come up after all the chaos, after Malcolm had been shot. And the first thing I heard them all say was, quote, is he with us? Is he one of us? As if even NYPD knew that there were undercover police officers in the Audubon Ballroom that day. And that's what we're getting to. We're finding out after the fact that this event on its face appeared to be just an intramural quarrel between Nation of Islam and Malcolm X. Turns out the building is full of all these infiltrators from the FBI and NYPD. One of them's acting as a bodyguard. The other one has had two of Malcolm's bodyguards arrested. They're sitting in jail while he's sitting there in the Audubon Ballroom. And when the NYPD shows up, they're trying to sort through all the people. Is this guy with us? Is he not? Because none of them have uniforms on. It's all these infiltrators or provocateurs, whichever you want to call them. Abdul Rahman Muhammad, pictured bottom right. If the NYPD had an agent in the Audubon that day, Gene Roberts, close enough to give him mouth to mouth, which is a verifiable fact, and we got pictures to prove it, it makes me wonder who else law enforcement had on the inside that nobody knows about. So we now know Gene Roberts and Raymond Wood were there. But according to FBI documents that didn't get released until years later, we now know, it's confirmed by their own documents, that there were at least 9 FBI informants in the Audubon Ballroom that day. And according to J. Edgar Hoover's own words, his instructions were that at all costs, quote, they should not let those informants be known. And at all costs, not let it be known what they might have been doing and whether they were working for COINTELPRO, which is tantamount to a confession. Of course, they're working for COINTELPRO. Arthur Fulton, FBI agent, said, quote, in corroboration of those documents, said, quote, the FBI had 9 informants. I had 9 informants. In other words, he was the supervisor. He was in charge. We got a report from all of them. A couple of them just quit. The shooting was more than they bargained for. Arthur Fulton is pictured, that bottom picture with the red circle. He's standing there posing with his family, and you notice who's in the middle of that picture. That's J. Edgar Hoover. I'm sure he got some sort of commendation for this mission. So when questioned in the aftermath, the FBI denied having any plainclothes informant. And of course, when the word comes down from J. Edgar Hoover, make sure no one finds out, that's what all the spokesmen are going to say. We didn't have anybody there. Turns out they had nine. Just flat out lied. None of these nine FBI informants ever testified, nor did Gene run. There's a difference here between an informant and an asset or an agent. An informant is a civilian who's been hired on by the FBI to just be in there and inform on what he's seeing. But because he's black and maybe he's a black Muslim, he can fit into that crowd. And so we have these nine informants that were there. None of them testified. Gene Roberts was prevented from testifying by the FBI. And of course, Raymond Wood didn't testify either. Fortunately, he gave his story before he died. So we're finding out as a result of FBI documents, they had nine informants. Arthur Fulton corroborates that. Yes, we had nine informants. Raymond Wood is saying, well, I was there. And in addition to Gene, we were both working for BOSSI, which means the FBI was there. And two of Malcolm X's most trusted bodyguards are sitting in jail because it was my job to get them arrested on this pretext of wanting to bomb the Statue of Liberty so we could get them out of the way. That's what's all come out in 2001, 2002, and 2023. 2021, 21, 22, and 23. It's security stripping. So these are the pictures of the two Malcolm X bodyguards that were supposed to be there that day. One's name is Walter Bowe, and in 2024, he was 93 years old. He's on the left. And Khalil Syed, who was 81 in 2024. So 59 years after Malcolm X's assassination, the two that had been arrested came forward. Now remember now, Raymond Wood's already come forward and told his part of the story. In 2021, of course, he made the statement in 2011, but Reggie comes forward in 2021. 3 years later, the two that were arrested finally come forward. Both men were charter members of Malcolm X's OAAU, so they were loyal to Malcolm X, which is why they were taken out. And these pictures, by the way, are pictures of them in the aftermath of their arrest. And of course, at this time, everybody thinks, oh, they were trying to bomb the Statue of Liberty. This is why Raymond Wood was seen as viewed as a hero. Syed said, on or about January 65, I was introduced to Raymond A. Wood. I only interacted with Wood on approximately 2 occasions. Robert Collier, a new acquaintance, told me he wanted me to introduce me to his friend who had some ideas. Makes you wonder about Robert Collier, doesn't it? To lure Raymond or Syed into this meeting with Raymond Wood. This friend was Raymond Wood. When Collier introduced me to Wood, I had only known Collier for 2 or 3 months. Story's expanding here. Collier sounds like he was part of the whole deal. Get close to Syed. You know, it's one of the things. If you were protecting Malcolm X, you were always on the alert for infiltrators. You were always on the alert for things of that nature where federal agents posing as, friends would try to infiltrate, and you were hyper alert to that. So you can't, Raymond Wood could not approach Syed himself. He has to go through an intermediary, through a friend, a friend of a friend kind of a thing. So this is how betrayals happen, right? So betrayal, it's as old as the crucifixion. Judas Iscariot himself, one of Jesus' apostles. So here's Collier, one of Syed's friends. Hey, you got to meet this guy. He's a good guy. So anyway, they have this meeting. And he said Walter Bowe, who was the other one that was arrested, was also present on these 2 occasions. Since Wood was undercover, I had no idea he worked for law enforcement. I later found out Wood was an undercover police officer from the NYPD in the Bureau of Special Services and Investigations, BOSSI. So, what happened at these meetings? According to Syed, the idea Wood introduced. Okay, so this is not Syed and Bo saying, "Hey, I got an idea to bomb up." No, this was Wood introducing this idea to have this conspiracy to destroy national monuments, and he named the Statue of Liberty. This is according to Syed. Those at the meeting laughed. So I assume Wood was not serious about this idea. I said very little at the meeting. In the weeks leading up to my wrongful arrest and incarceration, I never heard the idea again. That's all they needed was them present at a meeting where an FBI officer brought up the idea of a conspiracy to destroy national monuments, specifically mentioning the Statue of Liberty. I'm sure he was wired, so they had tape recorded. And that was enough probable cause to have them arrested, sitting in a jail cell, while their protectee, Malcolm X, was security strip led like a lamb to the slaughter, just like JFK was, just like MLK was, just like RFK was, and laid out there bare without security, having no idea that one of his remaining bodyguards is actually a BOSSI agent. I mean, it's unbelievable. And but this is how these things work. This is you can see the front page headline: Lady Liberty safe. They seize for hero spy cop foils bombers. Syed continues, this is quote, I was asked by a close follower of Malcolm X to serve as security at Malcolm X's home after it was firebombed on February 14th. So he's on the 14th, a week earlier. I was offered this opportunity because it was widely known that I respected Malcolm X and was interested in the OAAU. It was a small group of individuals who were asked to serve as security for Malcolm X's home, only 2 or 3 individuals per shift, which is why if you arrest 2 of those and take them out of circulation, you've pretty much compromised all of his security, right? Especially if you've infiltrated with one of your own. So you take out the 2, you infiltrate one of yours. Malcolm's a sitting duck. I would have always have made myself available to serve as security for Malcolm X. As I had, I would have always made myself available to serve as Malcolm X's security had I not been wrongfully arrested. It was widely known that Malcolm X's life was frequently in danger and under constant threat. This is a picture of him when he was arrested. So he continues. On or about February 16th, 5 days before Malcolm X's assassination, I was detained and arrested by the NYPD related to the Wood conspiracy. I was shocked to hear the department accusing me of conspiracy to destroy the Statue of Liberty. I lost 18 months of my young life for a crime I didn't commit. I believe I was detained in this conspiracy by the NYPD, BOSSI, and FBI in order to ensure Malcolm X's planned assassination would be successful. Had I not been arrested, I would have attended his speech and could have served as part of his security detail. And of course, Walter Bowe was his partner, who was also in prison during this time. So that is episode 10. That is the Raymond Wood story, along with the Mustafa Hassan details. And that shows clear evidence. I told you I'd give you more evidence of security stripping. So if you're counting or if you're keeping score at this point, as far as security, we now find out that Malcolm X's security detail was very small, 2 or 3 people per shift. And on the day he was shot, 2 of those were sitting in a jail cell on a pretext crime that was concocted up by an FBI agent named Raymond Wood. He was assigned to do that to get those 2 out of the way. We also know that one of the security guards left was a BOSSI infiltrator, Gene Roberts. So essentially what we now know is that Malcolm X had no security on that day. which, we kind of had warning of when Che Guevara decided not to attend and speak to the OAAU. His excuse was, hey, you don't have enough security. Two or three people's not enough. And especially if you're not going to search people at the door. And and then you find out that there are more NYPD slash BOSSI slash FBI agents slash informants in the crowd than there were Malcolm X security. The crowd there was at least 9 informants. There's at least 2 agents that we know of, right? Raymond Wood and Gene Roberts, in addition to the 9 informants for the FBI. And that doesn't count all of the NYPD uh, undercover. There were so many of them that the police, when they arrived, are asking each other, is he one of us? Is he one of ours? So the place was crawling with NYPD slash BOSSI slash FBI. And Malcolm's security was nowhere to be seen. So that's how these assassinations happen. You neutralize or compromise the security ahead of time. And, in a case where you're not dealing with the president, it's even easier. When the president is involved, you got Secret Service. And so it's a little tougher, and you got to have some people on the inside helping do it because it's an agency and there's a power structure that bosses have to be corrupted to give orders to replace, you know, normal security details with replacements that they know won't be up to the task, or take out people that won't be corrupted, won't allow themselves to be corrupted. It's so in the case of JFK, it was more difficult, but in the case of MLK, he had a 5-man private security team. They were all whisked away before he was shot. In Malcolm's case, he had 3. 2 of them were in a jail cell, and a third was an infiltrator from BOSSI. So he has no security. RFK had private security. I mean, one of them was a former football player. One of them was a former Olympic athlete. They just added one, and he turns out to be the assassin. So that's the first. That's why this last summer when there was that assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, against President or against Trump. First thing we find out, and the first thing I was looking for when I heard about the shooting, and I started to see how obvious it should have been to anyone whose job it is to protect this candidate for president. The fact that you had this guy sitting on a roof that people are staring up, they're looking, they're calling his name. Hey, there's a guy on the roof. He's shooting. And still it happened. It was clear to me immediately the Secret Service was compromised. And then in the ensuing days, we found out just how compromised it was. And it was the same MO. Take out the regulars, replace them with irregulars. People have no experience. People that some of them didn't even were like taking online courses the day of to get certified to be a Secret Service agent for that event. Online courses. Come on. I mean, it was the same deal. And so that's something to watch for in these high profile assassinations. Somebody close to the president who's loyal, or somebody close to whoever the protectee is, somebody who's loyal, they have to take them out. Because if they don't, it complicates things and you'll get in a shootout. They'll do what they're supposed to try to protect the guy. And it won't work. There will be witnesses. There'll be collateral damage because they'll die trying to do their job. So you got to take them out in advance. So that's the essence of the Raymond Wood story. And that moves us on to episode 11. And I think we're already starting to see picture coming together of FBI, uh, of an FBI conspiracy to use the NYPD, to use the Nation of Islam in its efforts to remove this black messiah. And this is all part of J. Edgar Hoover's COINTEL program, which he has functioning in all these major cities looking for communists, right? Socialists or communists, and using BOSSI to sort of be the uh, partner or the liaison between the FBI and the local police. So that's enough for today. And until next time, God bless. Thank you.